Hi, and welcome to episode 43 of the ChessTDD series. I'm picking up right where I left off in the last episode, trying to, keep at the implementation of pawns moving in the opposite direction, the black pawns, player 2 pawns. So coming right back with that, what I was doing was making an acceptance test pass that I had written, which was just kind of the basic one, like, hey, there's this black pawn in a vacuum that hasn't moved, and that pawn should be able to move one square ahead or two. And so I had dived in, if you'll recall, with some TDD to get the get moves from method for the pawn to where it needed to be, but then I also had to go and fix this is capture allowed, I think, or is non-capture allowed, I should say. And so that's where I am here. This is the set of tests for capture being allowed. And so what I wanted to do is, while I was still in the flow of that particular method, before going on to write more acceptance tests, I wanted to maybe drive out like what this should look like. Because if memory serves, I don't know that I was like fully pleased with the way it had wound up last time. So I am repeating what I had done before in concept, immediately like factored out a common method here to make these tests a little more readable and quick to write. So the first test that I want to have here is to say, and I accidentally typed the wrong name, so it wouldn't compile. I duplicated the last test name, but I just want to say, like, okay, is non-capture allowed for this pawn that hasn't moved yet? It should be true for two spaces ahead. Great, that works. And then I did another thing, like I mentioned last time, where I made a quick confirmation. I said, like, oh, let me change this to 4. And is it, like, restricting me from 3 ahead? Because it should be. Saw the test fail. Hey, great, that works. So now I'm thinking of what's the next test that I should write here? What am I suspicious of? What'll happen if I, try to do a diagonal capture situation? I believe was where my head was at. So 4, 2, 7. If I've moved, then I shouldn't. Actually, I should have probably named that like 425 or something. But if I set the has moved flag, which it wouldn't actually be a situation that would happen on a chessboard in a game situation. What if I come in here and say, like, hey, this piece is moved? What I'm expecting then is like, oh, it's not going to let me. It's not going to let me do that. But the test fails. And the reason it fails is because this is what I remembered from last time, where I'd said, I had gone and speculatively written this code that wasn't being used, so it wasn't covered. Well, now I remembered that, and I went in here and said, like, okay, let me actually write the test that that creates this situation. So this is a legit thing. If in this situation, I need to make it so that it's not letting me, after the piece is moved, go 2 spaces ahead, whether the pawn is black or white. So what I started to do is I had this notion that maybe I should make 2 inheritors of pawn and have black pawn and white pawn. But then I started to see, like, even if I did that, there would be a whole lot of duplication between those 2 classes. So maybe instead of, creating a 3-deep inheritance hierarchy and that sort of indirection, like, maybe I can just rewrite this is non-capture allowed method to be a lot more compact. So the first thing I noticed was that, like, the only difference here is that I'm having 1, 1, and 2 versus -1, -1, and 2. So why don't I just define this like multiplier that, depending on whether it's a player 1 piece or not, is 1 or -1. And then I'm going to go ahead here and write out the logic by hand. And what that's going to do is it's going to make a situation where the code below can't be reached. It's sloppy if you were to like keep that, but with ncrunch, it lets me see real quick, is this working, so I can back it out if it's not. But there it did, so I can go delete the rest of that code. I guess in a way it's like a shorthand, instead of like commenting code out, that's what I've taken to doing. So hey, that's a lot more compact. I am happy with the way that that looks for now. But then I started to think like, okay, this has moved. So if has moved, I do one thing, otherwise do another thing. That, I'm returning a Boolean, and I'm basing it on a Boolean. I think I can write that out more deterministically. And in fact, I think I can write it out in a way that is clearer, actually, that's sort of more expressive. So rather than saying, and this is something I like to steer away from, like, the sort of classic example you see of maybe poor Boolean usage is like, if X is true, return true, otherwise return false. Like, why wouldn't you just return X? This is kind of similar in concept. So what I want to do is the same thing I was doing before. I want to write this return statement that will make the rest of the code unreachable and see if I can get green here. And so really what I'm doing is saying, okay, what does this mean? Like, when is capture allowed? So it's allowed if we're doing, like a pawn can always move one space ahead. So let me first go with that conditional. Is this a vertical move by 1? If so, just return, it's true. Otherwise, if it hasn't moved and we're trying to move by 2, that's also cool. So now I have flattened that big ugly method with the conditional logic that I wanted to, fix with inheritance. I've like flattened this into 2 lines of code, albeit like one long line. So I'm going to pull out a method here to be more clear. And I'm going to say something like, okay, let's call this, or is this like special, first move pawn thing allowed? I forget what I actually called it. And I got hitched a little here looking at this because I was thinking like, man, I didn't think about the directional multiplier thing coming along for the ride. I don't know if I really want a 3-parameter method that's a little busy, and I don't think I need it. And so I started to get a little bit clever, and I kind of mean that, like, I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I mean it in sort of a good way. So the first thing I noticed is like, hey, this directional multiplier thing is based on a class level consideration, which is first player piece. So I don't need to pass that in. I can figure that out in that is special first pawn move allowed method. But then like another thing occurred to me, which is I can have a class level or an instance level thing where, I have this directional multiplier because this is just based on is first player piece or not. So I can create this little abstraction here and say, instead of like declaring a local variable there, this is just a way of capturing that, here's this directional concept based on this Boolean. So it's a conversion from the Boolean to an integer that's either 1 or -1. So let me even get that whole thing out of this is non-capture allowed method, and that's getting even cleaner. And now I can stop passing it around. I can just refer to it in any method that's here. So I like the way this is going. This class is getting a lot less yucky, and that's always good. So, and you'll notice that I'm kind of down this like mild rabbit hole of refactoring, and that's where your unit tests really shine through. That's a lesson to take away, certainly. I feel good about doing this because I've got these tests. I haven't quite fleshed out all the acceptance tests that I'd like for black, but I've got a lot of unit tests about white, so I know if anything's going to break with white. And I mean, hey, black wasn't really working anyway, so I'm not risking much. There are a few test cases with black, and as long as this stays green, I know those are passing too. So really, I'm compacting a lot by taking this directional multiplier and just kind of putting it, everywhere. So I'm going to refer to the property here that I have, and now I'm broken. What's wrong? I don't think I'm too far from getting it to pass. Can't remember exactly what I was doing wrong. I think I figured it out fairly quickly because when I think back on the gestalt of this episode, I don't really remember being stumped. And I'm batching here, so I just, in the last hour was also recording the audio for the previous 2. So anyway, I need the directional multiplier here. And in order to get that, I need to have that not be a static method anymore, which, I'm really liking the way this is shaping up. It's becoming a pretty cohesive method. Now I have all the methods in this class are referring to this field. So it's a cohesive class, and that's a good sign. Like if you have a local field or property or whatever, 1 or 2 of those, and all the methods operate on it, it's a nice cohesive class. So now I've got all these one-liners. I've gotten rid of a decent amount of like the private logic that was going on. Like this is starting to, be a thing that I'm happy about. I've got green still. So now this reads nicely. I feel good about what's going on. And I'm starting to think like, can I take these lessons I've learned and maybe apply it also to get moves from? I mean, that looks like a real possibility. Maybe I'll put a pin in that and come back to it. But like, hey, this has been pretty effective. And it's starting to look like maybe I'm not going to need to bother with, the rigmarole of creating an inheritance hierarchy and having a black pawn and a white pawn, which I really kind of didn't want to do since everywhere else, the, whether it's a player one or a player two piece is purely data. It's not like an actual like type. So that would create a weird abstraction, and if I can avoid that, that's good. So now I have addressed and done a bunch of refactoring kind of across the board, but what I haven't done yet is address this is capture allowed. So I'm feeling fairly good about is non-capture move allowed, and I'm feeling, about get moves from. I know it's got a little work to be done there, but it's good enough for the non-capture stuff. So I'm going to go in here and start to be deliberate about is capture allowed. So I want to go in here and start, expressing that the black pawn exists and capture should be allowed for the black pawn for diagonals that are descending in y coordinate value. So the first thing I want to do here is say it should be true that if I have a black pawn at 2-7 and the black pawn has a capture opportunity at 1-6, like that should be true. And this method should pass because if you'll recall, my is capture allowed, I had done a refactoring last episode that was slick, but it wasn't right. I was just saying like, hey, is this one of the 4 diagonals that are next to this particular pawn? So we would expect this actually to work for black. But what I need to do now is say like, okay, but the black pawn can't move backward diagonally to capture. And so now I'm expecting this to fail, and we're going to be back into like pure TDD mode. Well, after I do this extraction while I'm green, back to pure TDD mode. I'm going to have a nice failing red test that I can, do the simplest thing to make it pass. And you kind of get into, like with a real application, a lot of times the simplest thing you can do to get something passing isn't simple. There aren't like, the nice easy paths you'd have in a code kata or something. So there's really like nothing, one of the biggest things I've seen, and, just to go off on a mild tangent, is like, it gets really hard, and why I hope you're getting value out of these videos. So you go to a code kata to learn to TDD, and you're like, hey, that's great. I can like do Roman numerals in TDD, but what on earth do I do when I get to like a non-trivial code base? And there's this like gap in the, industry literature that there are some people who have tackled it, but it's certainly not common. So I'm trying to add to it a little bit. So anyway, now I got to go do something meaningful in this method. And, how am I going to fix this? So the simplest thing I can do here to get this to pass is actually, the simplest thing I can think of here, because I've got all these tests that if I do something obtuse might fail. Like, I think I just need to make a stab at like getting this right. So like, let's just, the simplest thing to do here is to make is capture allowed like the correct implementation. So I'm going to, just for my own reasoning about this, I'm gonna factor out this concept. So I'm going to get all 4 of these moves and I'm going to put them into an enumeration. And then I'm going to think like, okay, how am I going to restrict this down? So first of all, I need to check like, is the destination in this set of diagonal moves. So if you're passing in something that's not anywhere close to the pawn, I'm returning false, and that's what I should be doing. So first I have to check to see if it's like one of these 4 candidate moves, and then like what am I going to do next? And the thing I can think of to do here isn't real elegant, but it's basically to say like, okay, so if this is a first player piece, if it's a white piece, then I want to check to make sure that the origin's y coordinate is less than the destinations, that it's one of the 2 diagonal moves that are up a y coordinate. Otherwise, if it's not a first player piece, then I want to check and make sure that the origin is less than or greater than the destination, that it's moving, toward me as the first player. And hey, that gets everything passing. So I feel like now I've got a correct implementation of this. I'm not going to try to drive anything out of here with TDD. If this weren't working, it would be a bug to me. I would be wrong because I think this is right. And now I think I just maybe want to refactor a little because that's a little bit ugly. So do I pull a method out or do I start to apply maybe some of this logic of what did I have up there before? The multiplier. And I don't remember exactly what I did. I think maybe I went in here like kind of wholesale and said like, let me, as long as I'm in here and starting to really get into a groove of how I'm reasoning about this class, let me just try this. Like maybe I can do the same thing. I'm all green, so maybe I can actually get rid of all the cruft that I'm about to need to add to this get moves from method. And look at that, like it stayed green. So like everything is working for the, handful of test cases for black pawns that I have. So that's good. And do I maybe want to refactor here, or do I want to go and start like taking a crack at some of these acceptance tests? So maybe, that diagonal moves from isn't great, but I'll leave it for now and just see where we're at. Like, I think I went into this with kind of like this, like, mild adrenaline rush where I'm like, I think, by George, I think I've got it. Like, I think pawn might be right. So let's just start like throwing some, some acceptance tests at this and see what happens. Like, so if I put this black pawn here and then I move him forward. So I'm expecting this one to pass because like, we spent a good bit of time on that. I'm thinking this should work. So let's, invert all this and say that, all right, if we move this black pawn up 1 from where he starts, then the only move we should expect to see is this move to 5. And hey, cool. All right, so I'm getting excited, and I'm just starting to take all of these white scenarios that I had written a long time ago, and I'm going to copy and paste them for reference and naming consistency. And again, I've talked at times about not really minding the copy and paste here for readable acceptance tests. So I'm going to say like, okay, we've got a black pawn that we're going to put at the end of the board. So I'm going to put the pawn there at 1, 2. Instead of putting him directly at 1, 1, I want to put him at 1, 2 so we can, through the acceptance test, trigger his has moved property to be what it should be. And then, darned if that didn't work. Okay, so those two weren't, necessarily earth-shattering. Maybe this blocked pawn one is a little interesting. So did we implement blocking correctly? If I go up here and reverse this and I have a black pawn that's at 1, 7 and a white pawn that's at 1, 6, then my black pawn's set of moves should be empty. Now, I'm feeling good about these types of tests because if I'm still making the mistake of not treating black pawns properly, well, then that piece at 1, 7 should be, moving up to 1, 8. But if I find that that's not what's happening, we're in good shape. So can 1, 7 go anywhere? Nope. Another acceptance test passing. So, getting happier and happier as this goes along. And I'm thinking like, man, 1830 here. Can I do this in the next 2 minutes? Can I like mirror all the white acceptance tests and like, have I actually got this? I was pretty convinced at the beginning of this episode that, man, it was going to take another like 2 or 3 episodes. And this is really the nice thing about actually coding for like an hour at a time. Like, hey, look what happens when you sit down and like actually, concentrate and start getting things done. So going back here and inverting. So what I'm saying is like, in this situation, we should have this black pawn it's going to have 3 moves. It's going to be able to move to 1, 6, 1, 5, and then also 2, 6 and capture that white pawn. And is this going to work? Wow, okay. That's cool. So the only thing really left to test here is like, can the black pawn capture in the other direction? So this will be kind of the 4th direction of pawn movement. And if this works, I'm just going to drop the mic and head off into the sunset pretty happy here that like diagonal pawn capture is pretty well settled, and the black pawns do what they're supposed to do, and it's a pretty big win, given like what a shortcoming there was for inverting the directionality here. So, positive stuff all around. I'm gonna be hopeful about this test. We'll see how it goes. I know how it goes, though. I'm not gonna lie. So, it does wind up becoming successful. Sorry to deprive you of the, eureka moment of the green test, but it works. And, that's a pretty nice win here. This went well. So I'm going to check all this in, and then it's kind of that moment when you're coding and you're like, man, I slayed that dragon. Time to take a break and, figure out like what's the next big thing I want to tackle. For me, I'm about to go on a vacation here. So it'll probably be a little bit before I get back to this series and start coding again. And then maybe it's en passant, or maybe we look at castling, but we're kind of starting to get there. We've got these scenarios in the boards, it's looking pretty good. So I'm going to commit this and push it up to GitHub and, call it an episode, kind of think on, maybe what to do next time. And I am going to bias for shipping and getting moves in place instead of like more refactorings. So that's it. Thanks for watching once again. And I'm going to wrap up this episode with a commit, and I'll call it. So I will see you next time.